In AD 271, after more than 3 centuries, a major barbarian army reaches Italy. The Luthungi cross the Alpine passes and descend into the wide Po Valley. Rome is suddenly vulnerable. The frontier is no longer a distant line along the Rhine or the Danube. Now the front line is a few days' march from the capital. A year earlier, in 270, a new emperor had been proclaimed, not in Rome, but along the Danube. Aurelian is no court politician. He's shaped by the frontier, where legions decide directly who rules, and where every hesitation is paid in human lives. But the problem runs deeper than an invasion. In the west, along the Rhine, a separate empire controls Gaul. In the east, Syria has already shown how fragile authority can be. The currency is worth less. The armies demand pay and grain. Reuniting Rome won't mean winning battles alone. It means restoring imperial credibility across a world stretching from the Rhine to the Nile. Aurelian must prove that an empire that looks finished can still be governed. In September AD 270, after Emperor Claudius II dies at Sirmium in Pannonia, probably from the plague, succession opens in uncertainty. Claudius' brother, Quintillus, is proclaimed emperor in Italy, based in Aquileia, and at first wins recognition from part of the army and from the Senate in Rome. But the Danube soon decides. Yet on the Danube, the legions chose another commander, Aurelian. Within weeks, the balance shifts. Quintillus loses military support and dies. Sources say by suicide or killed by his own men before the armies ever meet. Aurelian does not come from the Senate or Rome's aristocracy. He is a commander forged along the Danube, where recent campaigns were fought against Goths and other peoples beyond the river. His authority comes directly from the frontier armies that chose him. In 270, the priority is to stabilize the middle Danube. The river is a continuous contact line. Quick raids, strikes, plunder, then a retreat beyond the frontier. Rome answers by concentrating forces and moving them quickly between hubs like Sirmium and Viminesium, linked by military roads that can shift detachments within days. In this phase, imperial command has to stay mobile at all times. The Danube is also a strategic hinge. From here, Rome can intervene quickly toward northeastern Italy through the Balkan corridor, or pivot east toward Thrace and the Bosporus. It is still the balance point between west and east. But as Aurelian strengthens this line, the empire remains divided. In the west, along the Rhine, the Gallic Empire still stands. In 270, it is led by Victorinus, and in 271, it will pass to Tetricus I, with power centered in Cologne and Trier. In the east, Syria lies under Palmyrene influence after Odenathus' campaigns and Zenobia's rise. When Aurelian takes power in 270, he does not inherit one front. He inherits 3 distinct power blocks: the Danubian belt under his direct control, the west along the Rhine, the Gallic Empire, then led by Victorinus, and the Syrian east, tied to Palmyra. Reunification isn't yet an official goal. The priority is to keep the Danube line from breaking and to stop Italy from becoming the next front. In 271, that danger becomes suddenly real.
Did you know that most people who watch our documentaries aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy animated maps and history, join our community. Leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next episodes.
In AD 271, a Germanic group moving in force, identified in the sources as the Luthungi, breaks into northern Italy. The column crosses the Alpine corridors, linking the Danubian region to the Italian plain, and heads toward the Via Aemilia corridor, the spine of northern Italy that connects the plains cities and intersects the roads climbing to the passes. This is not a handful of raiders. The fighting core, estimated at 10,000 to 20,000 men, is likely accompanied by wagons, booty, and families, as often happens in incursions of this era. Aurelian is stationed along the Danubian belt between Pannonia and Boeotia. He leaves the Danube line and moves toward Italy as quickly as he can, with mobile units drawn from the frontier army. Sources give no precise figures, but the operation implies a substantial force, likely 20,000 to 30,000 men, combining legionary infantry with a significant share of cavalry, now essential for responding to fast incursions. The first phase is the Germanic penetration. Plunder, then a rapid drive south, meant to hit and withdraw before Roman forces can concentrate. It is a string of raids aimed at booty, not conquest. Speed is their real protection. Aurelian intercepts the invaders at Placentia, near modern Piacenza. The first clash appears to go against the Romans. The speed of the incursion and the dispersion of units make immediate coordination difficult. For a moment, the initiative passes to the Luthungi. The danger is not only military, it is psychological. If northern Italy can be entered, cities farther south begin to fear that nobody can protect them. Roman command reacts by reorganizing its forces and pressing hard along the routes back north. Fighting shifts towards Ticinum, modern Pavia, and along the Ticino River. With retreat lines cut, the Germanic column is gradually driven back over the Alps within weeks before it can fully regroup. Italy is cleared, but the effect endures. For the first time in more than 3 centuries, the empire's heart has been threatened directly. After the northern campaign, Aurelian goes to Rome. In 271, he begins building the Aurelian Walls, a massive new circuit about 12 miles long raised around the capital. The walls defend not only the monumental center, but a far wider urban area, including suburbs and infrastructure designed for siege conditions. The decision marks a strategic shift. Rome is no longer automatically safe. The lesson is clear. Repelling one incursion isn't enough. If an army can reach the Italian plain in weeks, Italy is no longer a rear area. It is a potential front. In 272, Aurelian intervenes in the east. He crosses the Balkans, crosses the Bosporus, and advances through Asia Minor into Syria. Within months, the picture is clear. Palmyra is defeated, Zenobia is captured, and in 273, a second uprising is crushed for good. Here, the details of the battle don't matter. The effect does. For Aurelian, what counts is what the campaign gives back. Inner Syria returns to Roman control. Cities like Antioch fall back into the imperial orbit. Links toward the Euphrates are reopened. Access to Egypt and Alexandria, an essential hub for Mediterranean supplies, is no longer in doubt. Operationally, the East is not just rediscovered territory. It is a corridor reopened. It proves the center can still intervene quickly, on short notice, and impose obedience across great distances. But the Eastern campaign also teaches a lesson. In 273, Palmyra rises again. What a campaign regains can slip away if it is not held continuously. Military victory does not automatically translate into stable control once the army marches away. When Aurelian leaves Syria, the east is formally back under Roman authority. But the empire still depends on turning victory into lasting administration. That is the difference between reconquering territory and truly unifying it. In AD 274, after restoring the east, Aurelian turns west. The goal is no longer to contain a crisis, but to close a fracture that has been open since 260. Beyond the Alps, the Gallic Empire has existed for over a decade. It was born when Rome could not guarantee security and regular pay on every frontier. In Gaul, authority rebuilt itself locally. The march begins from northern Italy. Imperial forces cross the Alpine passes and enter Gaul along the major road corridors that link the Po Plain to the Rhone Valley and to Inner Gaul. This is no limited expedition. Sources give no exact numbers, but it is plausible that Aurelian concentrates several tens of thousands of men, legionary infantry and mobile cavalry, for a decisive campaign to end it. On the other side stands Tetricus I, Emperor of the Gallic Empire, with his political center at Trier and control of Gaul and, formerly, Britain. Numbers are uncertain, but the forces are substantial and comparable in scale to the imperial army. The Gallic army is not an improvised rebel band. It is a structured military apparatus that has defended the Rhine frontier for years. Aurelian's strategy is clear: avoid a long war and hit the command system. He advances along a corridor meant to separate Inner Gaul from the Rhine line, breaking cohesion between political centers and frontier forces. He forces the Gallic Empire to choose: defend its political heart or defend the frontier. It is a way to split and weaken Tetricus's forces before a decisive clash in open battle. The decisive clash comes in 274 in an area that late sources link to Chalons, though the exact location remains debated. The battle is not described in detail, but the outcome is clear. Tetricus either surrenders or is captured. Accounts differ. Late writers even hint at another possibility, that he sought a negotiated exit under military pressure and internal fragility to save his army and himself. Details are shaky, but the political fact remains. The West chooses to return to Rome, and the Gallic Empire stops existing as an autonomous entity. Some late sources say Tetricus is spared and reintegrated, and given an administrative post in Italy. That, too, is reunification, turning an enemy into an imperial official inside the system. Reunification is complete. From the Atlantic to the east, the empire is formally under one emperor again. But the West does not give way because it vanishes overnight. It yields because it is worn down. Years of pressure on the Rhine frontier, problems of legitimacy, dynastic instability, and isolation have weakened cohesion. Aurelian strikes when the structure still functions, but is fragile. In 274, the empire is won again, not through symbolic conquest, but because separate command centers have been eliminated. The fracture opened 14 years earlier is closed by a rapid, concentrated campaign carried out at the right moment. Now the question is whether political unity can become lasting stability in practice. In 274, after Tetricus is defeated, no alternative imperial centers remain. From the Atlantic to Syria, Gaul returns under Aurelian's direct control. The east was brought back under control the year before, and the Danubian belt is stabilized. In this context, the title Restitutor Orbis appears, Restorer of the World. It isn't just celebration, but a political statement. After 14 years of fragmentation, imperial unity is credited to one man's initiative. But reunifying does not automatically stabilize. Structures that adapted to division must now answer to a single center again and rebuild routines of obedience. Provincial governors, frontier commanders, and urban elites have to realign with an authority that for years was not the only one. In 274, Aurelian celebrates a triumph in Rome. The public image is an empire reassembled, but the balance remains personal. Cohesion depends on the emperor's presence and energy, on his ability to move fast from one front to another. In AD 275, while marching east, Aurelian is assassinated in Thrace. He does not fall to an external enemy, but to an internal conspiracy. The empire he reunified suddenly finds itself without its center of gravity. His death leaves a fundamental question. Can a state this fast survive if its unity depends so heavily on the initiative of a single man? And from that question, the next phase of the crisis begins. If you want to follow how this crisis evolves into a new imperial model, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for the next episode.